Hey guys. Tonight we slip quietly past the velvet shadows of Prague's cobblestone corridors into a world where glass flasks shimmer with greenish vapor and the walls sweat with secrets. Somewhere beneath the royal palace, you're hunched over a soot-stained table, poking a spoon into what smells suspiciously like scorched licorice and despair. There's a faint sizzle. Maybe your potion, maybe your sanity. You don't look up. That's how serious this has gotten. The candlelight flickers across ancient texts and cracked crucibles, dancing over a hand-drawn chart of planetary metals. Gold, of course, belongs to the sun, like you needed the reminder. That's your job now, turning not gold into gold. A noble calling, sure. One that's killed more than a few promising minds via arsenic poisoning or poorly timed explosions. But hey, you're different. You have ideas, you have ambition, and an emergency door wedged open, just in case. Honestly, you probably won't survive this. But before we let your eyebrows get singed off or your soul become property of a minor German demon, let's take a moment to ground ourselves. We're in the glittering yet grim twilight of the 16th century. Emperor Rudolf II of Bohemia, Holy Roman Emperor, amateur mystic, and full-time collector of very weird things, has invited you to his court. Or more accurately, he's demanded you serve him as his personal alchemist. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. No pressure. And please, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing how far across the globe our little bedtime caravan stretches. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're not the first to try this, of course. For centuries, alchemists had roamed from dusty Alexandria to the misty monasteries of Bavaria, each chasing that elusive formula, the philosopher's stone, said to transmute base metals into gold and maybe even grant immortality. It was the dream of kings and the doom of dreamers. And now, it's your problem. The room smells metallic, with undertones of singed lavender and what might be bat guano. Not your first choice for cologne, but in alchemical circles, it's practically Chanel No. 5. On the wall, a faded parchment shows the 7 planetary metals: gold, silver, mercury, lead, iron, copper, tin, linked to heavenly bodies: Mars, Venus, Saturn. The macrocosm mirrored in the microcosm. Your body is a furnace, your spirit the crucible. Your assistant, possibly illiterate but good with tongs. Alchemists weren't exactly scientists, but they weren't frauds either. Not all of them anyway. They were part pharmacist, part mystic, part guy who swore he could make gold if you just gave him more time. Modern scholars still argue whether most alchemists genuinely believed in what they were doing, or if some were just, well, very committed freelancers with access to cinnabar and too many candles. One peculiar ingredient in your drawer: crocodile dung. Ancient Egyptians used it in cosmetics and protection rituals, which somehow evolved into alchemists believing it had transformative properties. You haven't used it yet, but the urge grows nightly. Outside, the bells of St. Vitus Cathedral echo through the fog. Somewhere above your lab, the Emperor broods among his curiosities. He wants results. He's been promised gold. You, meanwhile, are wondering whether you can stretch powdered eggshell into something vaguely golden by moonlight and enthusiasm. The fire crackles. You lean closer to the beaker. It burps. And just like that, your story begins. Above your lab, where the walls of Prague Castle curve like the spine of some sleeping stone beast, Emperor Rudolf II paces between a brass globe and a taxidermied two-headed lizard. You've never been invited to his personal study, but you've heard stories, how he speaks to the paintings, how he sleeps under the astrological ceiling, how he once spent 3 days trying to teach a parrot the Latin for transmutatio. Rudolf is not your average monarch. For starters, he doesn't care for war, women, or winning arguments with his many, many cousins. What he does care about, deeply, almost unsettlingly, is the supernatural. Astrology, alchemy, numerology, and everything in between. You've seen his court astrologer plotting horoscopes with the intensity of a man diffusing a bomb. It's contagious. You've started watching the moon phases like a farmer watching for frost. And now, lucky you, you're at the heart of his most urgent obsession: gold. You see, the Holy Roman Empire isn't exactly swimming in coin these days. The treasury rattles more than it rings. Spain is flaunting new world riches, the Ottomans loom, France is francing. Meanwhile, Rudolf has sunk a small nation's worth of funds into glass orbs, rare minerals, and manuscripts that may or may not be written in made-up languages. He wants a shortcut to wealth and immortality. He wants to cheat nature and economics and time. And guess who gets handed the test tube? The emperor hasn't said it out loud, but everyone in the court knows. If you succeed, you become a legend. If you fail, well, let's just say the moat is unusually deep this year. Rudolf believes in alchemy not just as science, but as salvation. And, to be fair, you get it. Alchemy isn't just metalwork, it's cosmic reconciliation. The idea that base things, when purified, can become noble. It's almost poetic, almost spiritual, but also very expensive, especially when mercury is involved, which, spoiler, it always is. Mercury, the silvery liquid metal you can't stop accidentally touching, is essential to almost every alchemical operation. People back then thought it was the first matter, the soul stuff of all creation. Modern chemists call it toxic and point to the neurological symptoms it causes. But back in Rudolf's time, mercury was the closest thing to bottled magic. It dances, glimmers, and slowly unravels your cognition like a Renaissance slow cooker. And yet, with Rudolf breathing down your neck, metaphorically, though he's been known to appear in basements unannounced, you still have hope. A tiny glimmer of what if? What if you really can do this? What if gold is possible? Some historians suggest Rudolf didn't care whether it worked. He just wanted to believe that his fascination with alchemy was more about control than coin. A man drowning in politics, reaching for something pure. But others argue he was desperate, gambling his empire's future on philosophical powder. Still others think he simply liked shiny things and men in robes. What we know for sure is this: he found you. You, with your patched-up robe, your chipped alembic, and your increasingly dramatic dreams about turning beetles into rubies. And you said yes. You arrive in Prague under a sky the color of overripe plums, the air thick with chimney smoke and murmurs. Porters struggle with your crates, wooden boxes packed tight with glass flasks, animal bones, and what looks suspiciously like pickled toads. A crowd gathers, not the warm, curious kind, the "is that an exorcism or a taxidermy session" kind. You smile tightly and adjust your hat, which you're beginning to suspect is on fire. Your name, at least the one you're using this month, echoes through the castle's stone corridors like a half-forgotten spell. To some, you're the famed alchemist who turned clay into copper in Vienna. To others, a charlatan who faked a transmutation using cleverly painted walnuts. Honestly, both stories have a kernel of truth. You prefer to think of yourself as a practitioner of creative outcomes. The Emperor's steward greets you with the enthusiasm of a man who's seen 3 other alchemists disappear under mysterious circumstances. He offers you a room. It has bars on the window and no view of the sun. Perfect. You nod politely and request extra shelves for your materials, carefully not specifying which of them might be alive. The court is abuzz with whispers. You're the new pet of Rudolf's intellectual zoo. Some smirk behind your back, calling you a magician. Others try to get close, asking casual questions about your methods, while clearly hoping to steal your notes. And then there are those who look genuinely afraid of you or of what might happen if you succeed. You begin your work with a ritual boiling of wormwood and powdered horn. Not because it's necessary, but because it smells weird and makes your neighbors uncomfortable. It's important to establish boundaries early. Historians still argue whether these early alchemists truly believed in their experiments, or if they were clever manipulators exploiting royal obsession. Some say the answer lies somewhere in the middle. A little faith, a little fraud, and a lot of fumes. As you unpack, your fingers linger on a small etched vial. Inside, red powder, finely ground. Dragon's blood, the label reads, though you're fairly certain it's just expensive tree resin. Still, it makes a statement. So do the beetle wings. So does the rolled-up goatskin etched in mirror-written Latin and smeared with what you hope is wine. Alchemy's odd like that. You work with real elements, lead, sulfur, antimony, and then mix in the metaphysical. Salt represents the body, sulfur, the soul, mercury, the spirit. It's like cooking if your grandmother was a mystic and your oven was a small demon named Carl. One of your first visitors is a nervous monk sent to catalog your materials. He takes one look at the dried shark jaws and blurts, "Is that a baby's tooth inside a walnut?" You nod solemnly. "Yes, but only on Tuesdays." He leaves you alone after that. Still, not everyone stays away. Late one evening, a man appears at your door. His robes are elegant, his eyes lined with ink and insomnia. He introduces himself as Johannes, court mathematician, astrologer, and, judging by his jittery pacing, part-time squirrel. "The Emperor believes in your work," he says softly, "but others do not." You offer him tea. It's mostly moss and optimism. He sips politely. You're not alone in this, but you're also not safe. By your 3rd week in Prague, you've grown used to the sound of dripping water and anxious footsteps above your lab. The castle has moods, whispers that roll through the halls like wind through hollow pipes. You ignore them. You have bigger concerns, mainly the foot-long crack in your alembic and the increasingly demanding notes arriving from the Emperor, often smeared with what looks like candle wax, but smells faintly of desperation. You're running out of time. So, naturally, it's time to pursue the most absurd goal of all, the Philosopher's Stone. Ah yes, the holy grail of alchemy. Not just some dusty red rock, but the key to ultimate transmutation. Legend says it turns base metals into gold and grants eternal life. Scholars once called it lapis philosophorum.
You call it a nightmare in powdered form. You've never seen one, of course. No one has. Not really. But that hasn't stopped an entire generation of noble patrons, bored monks, and overly ambitious wizards from spending lifetimes chasing it. The recipe? Well, that's the fun part. No one agrees. Some say it involves calcined gold. Others whisper about white lions and red serpents. One manuscript even mentions boiling urine during a lunar eclipse. You're tempted to try that last one just to see who comes running. The Emperor? He wants it yesterday. He's convinced the stone exists. He's read the texts, commissioned the scrolls, even summoned a Spanish mystic who insisted it must be grown like coral and fed prayer. That mystic now tends the garden. I think his name was Felix. Still, you press on. Late into the night, you scribble symbols, some drawn from Arabic treatises, others from Greek, and at least one that might be a crude doodle of a pig with wings. You boil, grind, and ferment substances that would make modern toxicologists sob. One morning, your assistant brings you a bowl of porridge, and you nearly mix it with your quicksilver slurry. Honest mistake. Alchemy is intoxicating. It offers a cosmic logic, transforming the impure into the pure, chaos into perfection. Historians still debate whether this was ever meant to be literal. Some argue that alchemy was spiritual at its core, a metaphor for personal transformation. Others insist that no, people really tried to make gold out of lead because they wanted to retire early and buy castles with heated floors. And then there are those who say it was both, the physical and the philosophical, intertwined, like soup and meaning, or cheese and destiny. One of your more bizarre ingredients this week, crystallized deer brain soaked in rose oil, supposedly stabilizes the volatile spirit of Saturn. More likely it just stinks. But you mash it into a paste anyway, humming softly as your fingers stick to the mortar. You're getting close, or at least you think you are. The liquid in your flask turns a shade of red you haven't seen before, somewhere between rust and promise. It bubbles in time with your heartbeat. Your assistant peers over your shoulder and murmurs, "Is that supposed to happen?" You pretend it is. And maybe, just maybe, it is.
Your lab, if one could be generous enough to call it that, now resembles the inside of a dragon's stomach. Dark, smoky, and full of unsettling jars. You've spread out over 3 tables, 2 benches, 1 rickety bookshelf, and somehow the ceiling? Don't ask how the parchment got up there. It's best not to revisit those fumes. The fire in your furnace roars with the intensity of a drama-loving opera singer. The crucibles are stained from overuse and questionable cleaning practices. Your gloves are stiff with residue. You really ought to change them. But instead, you double down. Today's the day you try that risky fusion involving powdered lead, wine sediment, and sunstone essence, which might just be orange chalk in disguise. The potion hisses. You flinch. Your assistant ducks. The ceiling sighs. Welcome to your workspace. The average modern scientist might find your setup concerning. No ventilation, minimal labeling, and an unhealthy reliance on guesswork. But hey, it's the 16th century. Standards are more guidelines and less legal requirements. And so you carry on, stirring mixtures that bubble in unnatural colors and release clouds of fog that occasionally form vague human shapes. One even looks like your father. You ignore it. Mercury continues to be your frenemy. It slips through your fingers, literally, and seems to develop a personal vendetta against your glassware. But you can't quit it. According to lore, it's the fluid essence of all metal, the trickster between worlds. Historians today still debate whether its use in alchemy was scientific or more symbolic. Maybe both. Maybe neither. Maybe Mercury just liked to be included in things. Speaking of ingredients, today's star players include calcinated eggshells, crushed emerald and a splash of rabbit bile. You handle each like sacred relics, whispering the accompanying incantation from a torn Greek manuscript whose author may have been drunk or divine. Or both. Alchemy wasn't just about combining materials. It was also about timing, astrology, and a deeply personal connection between elements and operator. You once read that the alchemist's inner purity affected outcomes. You laughed, then coughed, then kept stirring. At this stage, your experiments oscillate between minor success and almost the roof on fire. Last night, you discovered a waxy, semi-metallic residue that shimmered under candlelight. You named it proto-gold. Your assistant named it don't touch that. A wise lad. Also on today's agenda is rearranging your shelf of symbolic tools. You've got the salamander tongue tongs, which do not involve actual salamanders, thankfully, the toadstone, allegedly from a toad's skull, and the philosopher's compass, which you're 99% sure just points north, but mystically. The thing is, alchemy required its own language, physical and metaphorical. A lion eating the sun could represent sulfur-consuming gold. A raven devouring a frog might symbolize decay before rebirth. Or maybe the original artists were just bored and highly caffeinated. You consult your notes, which now resemble the dream journal of a sleep-deprived monk. There's a scribbled phrase you don't remember writing. Open the ash, and the king within awakens. Is it metaphor, prophecy, or recipe? You underline it twice. Then you lean in over the boiling mixture. It pops like angry pudding. You sigh, and keep stirring.
At some point in your nightly chaos, ink-stained fingers trembling from lack of sleep and an overdose of nutmeg fumes, you realize your notes are starting to look more like art than science. Symbols spiral across the parchment like dancing skeletons. Circles intersect with triangles, overlaid by serpents biting their own tails. You pause, blink, and whisper, "What does that even mean?" Your assistant shrugs and returns to cleaning the explosion-stained mortar. He's learned not to ask. Welcome to the symbolic side of alchemy, a world where language folds in on itself and meaning hides behind layers of mysticism. Every symbol is a code. Every drawing is either a metaphor, a warning, or a cosmic in-joke. You're not entirely sure anymore. There's the Ouroboros, of course, a snake eating its tail, representing eternal cycles, death and rebirth, or perhaps just an unhealthy obsession with reptilian flexibility. Then the square inside the circle, the triangle balanced on a square, the sun within the moon, within the eye. It's a whole geometry of longing. You sketch them instinctively now, as though they're keys to a lock you can't quite see. Some days you write in Latin, other days Arabic. Once in something that looks suspiciously like gibberish, but made you feel very powerful for a solid 20 minutes. Alchemy's written language wasn't just about obscurity, it was about protection. Ideas had to be hidden from the uninitiated, or from rival alchemists who might plagiarize your secrets and pass them off to impatient kings. Historians still argue whether this cryptic style was meant to preserve knowledge, or simply confuse everyone until they gave up and went into cheesemaking. A popular theory suggests the secrecy wasn't just to hide methods, but also to keep practitioners safe. After all, not everyone viewed alchemy kindly. The church oscillated between tolerating it and condemning it, depending on the decade and the results. A failed experiment might be heresy. A successful one? Witchcraft. You had to play it cool. And by cool, we mean encode your recipe inside an allegorical poem involving lions, peacocks, and an inexplicable egg. Today, you try mixing two types of ink, oak gall and iron sulfate. to recreate an ancient formula said to reveal truth through shadow. What it reveals is a stain that won't come off your thumb and makes your fingernail glow faintly under moonlight. Huh. Noted. You test a parchment from a 13th century codex. Hidden under its illuminated letters is a sketch, a crowned man weeping into a chalice. You have no idea what it means, but it feels alchemical. So, obviously, you redraw it larger and add rays of fire. Very mysterious. You start to dream in symbols. You wake up mumbling solve and coagula, the old Latin for dissolve and bind. It's alchemy's core concept. Break down the material, rebuild it new. The Phoenix routine, but stickier. And still, the Emperor's messages come, asking for updates. Has the gold arrived yet? Is the stone almost ready? You consider sending back a single symbol, a blank circle with a dot in the center, the alchemical sign for gold, and also, depending on context, please stop asking. Instead, you sigh, dip your quill, draw another moon inside a triangle. One of these days, it'll make sense.
The deeper you delve into your work, the more you notice it. The way conversations halt when you enter a room. The way cloaks shuffle just a little too quickly down corridors when you're approaching. Even the castle cats have started watching you with narrowed eyes. And no, that's not paranoia. Probably. The imperial court is a beast with many heads, most of them whispering and several wearing far too much perfume. While Emperor Rudolf may be enraptured by your potions and promises, his courtiers, they smell opportunity, or failure, and they'd rather not be caught on the wrong side of either. Some pretend friendliness, offering you rare ingredients or helpful advice. Try boiling your cinnabar with a sprig of rosemary under a blood moon, one of the ministers suggests, casually sipping wine. You smile and nod. Later, you find that same minister instructing a young apothecary to replicate your notes, badly. Others are more direct. The chamberlain pays you a surprise visit, asking whether the emperor's funds are being put to proper use. He stares at your half-melted retort as if it personally offended him. You tell him the recipe involves patience and planetary alignment. He leaves muttering something about budget reviews and goat bones. Historians still debate whether the alchemists of this period were true researchers or political pawns used by factions within the court to curry favor with the throne. There's strong evidence for both. Your current experience definitely leans toward political pawn with a side of possible scapegoat. Even the kitchen staff has opinions. One servant corners you to ask if you're the one who cursed the bread. You haven't, yet, but you make a note to look into yeast transmutation, just to be thorough. Late one night, you find a scroll slipped under your door. No seal, no signature. It reads, "He who makes gold uninvited is seen as blessed. He who makes gold by order is seen as threat." A friendly warning or a not-so-subtle threat? Hard to say. Either way, it sends a chill through your ribs and makes you rethink your decision to sleep with the door unlocked. To make matters more interesting, a group of astrologers invited to the court has taken a curious interest in your work. They hover around your lab like moths around an overused metaphor, occasionally pointing to constellations and declaring things like, "Ah, yes, the hour of the crowned salamander approaches." Whatever that means. You start noticing more eyes in paintings tracking your movements. Probably your imagination. Probably. Your assistant swears he saw someone rifling through your journals. You set a trap the next night. A fake recipe involving honey, powdered glass, and owl toenails. Sure enough, someone tries it. The hallway reeks of regret by morning. And yet, despite the tension, part of you thrives on it. There's power in being feared, or at least in being rumored to be dangerous. You start carrying your vials with more flair. You hum cryptic chants under your breath when walking past suspicious courtiers. You once spent 10 minutes in the garden simply holding a glowing stone and staring into the sun. No one's messed with you since.
By now, the atmosphere in the castle has the nervous tension of a stage play where someone forgot their lines, and that someone might be you. The Emperor's latest note arrives folded into a perfect square and sealed with black wax. It reads simply, "Gold, soon." No greeting, no pleasantries, just one word, and the ominous implication that your deadline may now be more literal than professional. This is the unspoken rule of working for monarchs obsessed with transformation. If you don't turn lead into gold, they may turn you into a puddle of regret, or into a pile of forgotten clothes left behind in a locked laboratory. It's not entirely clear what happens to failed alchemists here, but the last one's room now houses a taxidermied jackal and 3 unclaimed hats. Make of that what you will. The pressure ratchets up with each passing hour. You begin to notice details in strange places, the peculiar way the guards glance at your lab, how the steward now refers to your experiments in the past tense, and how your meals are served with slightly more finality. You start locking your lab door, then barricading it, then sleeping inside next to your volatile mixtures and a dagger tucked inside your boot, just in case. You're not even sure who you'd use it on. Yourself? A spy? That one shadow that keeps lingering just beyond the candlelight? Still, you work, feverishly. You melt, stir, filter, and distill. You whisper old incantations in 6 languages and burn your fingers on a furnace you keep insisting isn't hot enough. One of your crucibles cracks from overuse. You weep quietly, then steal a serving dish from the kitchen and repurpose it. It's not the first time someone's eaten off of lead-coated despair. Meanwhile, Emperor Rudolf waits above, increasingly impatient. He's become reclusive, even for him, refusing counsel, ignoring military briefings, and spending hours locked in his chamber staring at his mechanical beetles, all of them golden, all of them, ironically, made by craftsmen who were paid in copper. Historians still argue whether Rudolf genuinely believed you, or whether he merely needed to believe. The empire was unstable, the treasury was shrinking. Gold, real or not, would be a symbol, an illusion of control. But illusions, as you know, can become very dangerous when they're all a man has left. And while you're chasing gold, let's not forget, you're also playing with fire, literally and metaphorically. Your last attempt at quick transmutation ended in a flare of blue light and an accidental scorched ceiling tile that now reads, "Avoid this." Not helpful, but memorable. You try something bolder, adding a pinch of arsenic and trace silver into your heated mixture. The result? A soft hiss, then a pop, then a substance the color of bruised grapes. It smells faintly of success, or sulfur, or both. Your assistant suggests naming it ambiguityite. You're not sure if you're closer or further, but what you are sure of is this. If you don't produce something soon, anything, golden, shiny, or remotely convincing, you may be the next item in the Emperor's cabinet of curiosities. You're summoned. No note this time, no knock on your door. Just a tall man in velvet gloves appearing like a wraith and saying, "His Majesty requires your presence." You consider faking a sudden case of philosopher's gout, but your assistant's eyes scream, "Don't you dare!" So you nod, smooth your soot-streaked robes, and follow. Up, up, through winding staircases that seem built more for dramatic effect than efficiency, until you're led into the infamous Cabinet of Curiosities, the Emperor's private chamber of oddities. You'd heard whispers, of course, but nothing prepares you. The moment you step inside, your brain has to recalibrate. To your left, a taxidermied platypus beside what is definitely not a human foot in a jar labeled mermaid. On your right, mechanical beetles with jeweled wings clicking along copper tracks, and a tiny glass violin playing itself badly. The shelves overflow with bones, scrolls, celestial globes, and teeth. So many teeth, not all of them human. In the center stands Emperor Rudolf II himself, clad in a velvet robe the color of oversteeped tea, his beard unkempt, and his eyes alight with that particular blend of genius and mild doom. "Isn't it marvelous?" he says, gesturing at a display case of preserved hummingbirds posed mid-air like they're frozen mid-gossip. You nod politely, eyes lingering on a bottle labeled Tears of the Moon. It looks suspiciously like watered-down opal. Rudolf watches you with the intensity of a man who's waited far too long for good news. "He's added new treasures," he murmurs, "from Constantinople, and a jawbone from somewhere important." He trails off and opens a drawer to reveal a small, glittering pebble. "Do you think this could be the stone?" he whispers. You lean closer. It's a polished chunk of amber with a beetle inside. You shake your head gently. "No, Majesty, but perhaps a sign." You've learned to answer in riddles. It's safer that way. Historians still argue whether Rudolf truly believed that he might stumble upon the Philosopher's Stone in one of his acquisitions. Some say his fascination with rare objects was symbolic, an attempt to collect the secrets of the universe in one room. Others believe he'd simply lost the ability to distinguish between wonder and delusion. He turns suddenly, beckoning you deeper, past the shelves of celestial atlases and shrunken heads, to a side chamber. A single object sits in a shaft of filtered light, a golden orb. "It came from Spain," Rudolf says, voice low. "They claim it was made by alchemy." You reach out, hands trembling slightly. The orb is heavy, warm, possibly gilded wood, or something more exotic. Either way, it's beautiful and hollow. "You will make one like it," Rudolf says. Not a question, a royal imperative. You bow, slowly. "Of course." As you leave the chamber, your head spins, not just from the dizzying scent of dried peacock and mothball oil, but from the realization that the Emperor doesn't want proof. He wants miracles. And you, whether you like it or not, are now part of the exhibit. You're still thinking about that orb when you return to your lab, that warm, golden orb, almost convincing enough to be real. Almost. The kind of object a desperate king might believe in if he squinted hard enough and suspended disbelief like a nobleman suspends taxes. You stare at your own workstation, now a battlefield of failed attempts and singed notes, and sigh. The latest mixture sits sullenly in a cracked crucible, a dull gray paste that refuses to glitter, glow, or even fizz. You give it a half-hearted stir. It responds by burping smoke. And then the rumors begin. It starts with a whisper. "Did you hear?" someone says near the garden, loud enough for ears to catch, but quiet enough for deniability. Another alchemist claimed he made gold from chicken feathers. You laugh at first, then you stop laughing.
because the story keeps growing. According to the tale, the new alchemist, an impossibly tan man from the south with a voice like melted butter and the fashion sense of a firework, performed a demonstration in front of nobles. He plucked a handful of goose feathers, dipped them into a mixture of ash, wine, and sun dust, and poof, gold flakes. You hear this from your assistant, who delivers the news while holding a tray of questionable tea and wearing an expression that says, "Please tell me we can also make birds into treasure now?" You ask what court scholars said. The response, "They clapped, politely. Some fainted." You resist the urge to throw a beaker across the room. Historians still debate if these kinds of stunts were deliberate fraud or just chemically clever stagecraft. Some alchemists learned how to use sleight of hand, clever dyes, or mercury compounds to mimic transmutation. Others may have planted actual gold dust in their reagents. A few possibly believed in their own tricks, caught somewhere between hope and hustle. You decide to investigate. Discreetly. Later that evening, while cloaked in your best don't-look-at-me disguise, which honestly just involves smudging more soot on your face, you watch the crowd gather around the newcomer. He smiles, waves, and repeats the demonstration. Goose feathers, flask, stir, sparkle. You squint. The mixture isn't transforming the feathers, it's coating them. Something thick and metallic, possibly brass with a dye additive. You catch a glint of false bottom in the vessel. You almost applaud the technique. Almost. But the crowd? They eat it up like roasted pheasant. Nobles gasp, courtiers swoon. One elderly bishop clutches his pearls and then faints. Definitely a Tuesday. You trudge back to your lab feeling half dead and fully insulted. And yet the next morning, the emperor sends you a note. "Show me feathers that shine." So now, apparently, you're competing in the poultry Olympics. You consider replying with, "Would His Majesty prefer bronze pigeons or platinum quail?" But instead you return to your desk and begin experimenting with egg yolks, mica, and a ground-up spoon, just to see what sticks. This is alchemy, after all, where gold might be found in feathers or in very elaborate lies. After the whole feather fiasco, your lab has taken on a new ambiance, equal parts desperation and defiance. You've cleared a workspace just for optical illusions and other low-level sorcery, which now includes a jar of glittering sand, 3 painted walnuts, and a pigeon you've been eyeing with increasingly experimental thoughts. But tonight you take a different approach. You're tired, the kind of tired that seeps into your bones and makes your dreams hum with strange voices. So you lean into it. You decide boldly, recklessly, to attempt a revelation ritual using smoke and dreams. Not because it's guaranteed to work, but because you need something to shift. Also because someone stole your antimony and this seemed easier than screaming into the moat. You light a bundle of dried herbs, wormwood, sage, fennel, and a pinch of mandrake powder. It burns with a slow hiss, the smoke curling upward in thick, syrupy ribbons. The scent is earthy, slightly bitter, and a little like your uncle's cough remedy. You breathe it in anyway. Your vision swims. This wasn't entirely uncommon in alchemical circles. Many practitioners believed altered states could yield deeper truths. Some even claimed that dreams, especially those tinged by fumes, were communications from the divine or messages from the philosopher's realm. Historians still argue whether these dream rituals were serious experiments or just the Renaissance version of creative procrastination. You lie back on the floor.
ink-stained hands folded over your chest, eyes on the stone ceiling. The smoke grows thicker. Swirls take shape. You see, well, you're not entirely sure. A crown, a lion, a tiny man in a powdered wig riding a fish. Probably not helpful. Your assistant sits silently nearby, writing everything down. You told him to transcribe your visions no matter how absurd. He once wrote, "Subject mumbled something about celery and the golden egg of regret." Useful stuff. And then it happens. You see a pattern emerge in the smoke. A spiral, splitting into 3 streams. You recognize it from a German grimoire you once accidentally set on fire. You sit up too quickly and knock over a vial of camphor. The smell hits like a slap from a ghost. You scribble the spiral down, matching it to a recipe that had puzzled you for weeks. Suddenly, things click, or at least wobble vaguely into place. You need to reverse the sulfur flow, double the distillation, burn it under Venus's rising, maybe also stop using pigeon blood. Fringe beliefs weren't rare among your peers. One alchemist insisted that using ink from squid increased philosophical insight. Another swore that eating only white foods during the waxing moon enhanced purity. You once tried the latter and passed out from an all-turnip diet. Never again. Still, tonight feels different. You add a single drop of your newest tincture to the base mixture, something you extracted from fermented rose thorns and a splash of muskrat saliva. Don't judge. The result? A flicker, a shimmer, a subtle change in viscosity. The color shifts from dull brown to molten bronze. You almost cry. Or maybe that's the mandrake kicking in. You lean back, eyes heavy, fingers twitching with excitement and fatigue. You whisper, "We're close." And the smoke swirls in agreement.
You wake up face down on your notes, which are now lightly glued to your cheek by a combination of drool and pine resin. The candles have burned down to exhausted stumps, and a faintly glowing trail leads from your desk to the corner of the room. You blink, rub your eyes. The rat is glowing. Not brightly, mind you, no one's going to mistake it for a divine messenger, but unmistakably, undeniably, it has a soft greenish shimmer, like moonlight trapped in fur. It sniffs the air, then resumes chewing a piece of waxed linen. You sit up slowly, spine cracking like a weathered scroll. "Tell me that's not new," you whisper. Your assistant, half asleep and curled up under a pile of alchemical manuscripts, opens one eye. "I think it ate the mixture," he says. You blink again. "You let it eat the mixture?" "In my defense," he mumbles, "it glowed after." Historians still debate how much early alchemy brushed against what we'd now call toxicology. Mercury, arsenic, lead, they were used liberally, often in enclosed spaces with poor airflow and zero regulation. There were diaries where alchemists described their hair falling out as a sign that something was working. Others noted visions of glowing animals and angelic beings that, in hindsight, were probably just brain cells giving up. But still, this glowing rat, it's not nothing. You jot down the specifics: time of ingestion, color hue, texture shift in its fur, whether its whiskers seem extra sentient. All data points, all potential clues. And while you're at it, you invent a name for the compound: luminorentia, because every accidental discovery deserves a pretentious Latin tag. Your assistant asks the obvious question: "Do we tell the Emperor?" You pause. Imagine it. Storming into the throne room with a glowing rodent in your arms declaring, "Behold the future of the Empire!" Maybe not yet. Instead, you decide to replicate it. Not the rat, just the reaction. You measure out the mixture again, adjusting the ratios, ensuring no rat saliva contamination this time. The result? A mild shimmer in the base, but nothing like before. You frown, scribble notes. Circle the part in your journal where you wrote moon juice in large, frantic letters. Alchemy, as ever, refuses to play by consistent rules. It's part recipe, part ritual, part personality test. Some claim success only comes when the alchemist is in the right spiritual alignment. Others say it's all about timing, planetary positions, moon cycles, whether or not your enemy is watching. And then there's the fringe crowd who think animals are key, especially glowing ones. You spend the rest of the day tracking the rat, noting its behavior. It seems smarter, like it's thinking or plotting. It builds a tiny pile of silver shavings in the corner, curls up around it, and sleeps. You respect the hustle. Later, you coat a small stone in the base compound and leave it by the fire. It, too, begins to shimmer, faint but visible. You sit back, exhausted but buzzing. It's not gold. Not yet. But it is something. And in this castle, something might be enough to survive another week.
Your progress report arrives on a silver tray, delivered by a footman whose expression suggests he'd rather be anywhere else, including the Plague District. The note is scrawled in the Emperor's unmistakable script, "Update required, preferably good." You sigh, sip your increasingly suspicious tea, and start drafting a response with exactly the right blend of enthusiasm and vagueness. Words like promising, transformative potential, and preliminary radiance observed in organic test subject make your nonsense sound quite regal. You even sketch a tiny glowing rat in the margin, labeling it Experimental Luminal Host V1.0. You seal it with wax and hope for the best. The real issue, though, the Queen. She's not your biggest fan. Word has reached your soot-stained ears that Her Majesty has been displeased. Something about persistent chemical odors, singing from the walls, and maids reporting ghost sightings near the West Wing. Okay, fair. The singing was real. Your assistant insists the crucible emitted Gregorian chants during the last distillation, which might have been a side effect of the wormwood vapor or possibly his lack of sleep. You're summoned, again, but this time to a side chamber, one that smells like dried lavender, polished mirrors, and cold judgment. The Queen is seated, back straight, hands folded with the quiet fury of a woman who's endured 3 days of sulfur seeping through the drapes. "Your fumes," she says flatly, "are haunting the upholstery." You bow. "My deepest apologies, Your Majesty. The essence of transformation is robust." She narrows her eyes. "One of my canaries fainted." You want to ask if the bird is okay, but think better of it. "I understand the Emperor's interests," she continues, "but this," she gestures vaguely toward the castle walls as if they too have become complicit, "this is not sustainable." Historians still debate how much influence Rudolf's consort had over his alchemical pursuits. Some believe she privately supported the experiments, viewing them as symbols of divine curiosity. Others argue she merely tolerated them until they began warping the windows and confusing the dogs.
You reassure her with a carefully rehearsed explanation about ventilation improvements, containment protocols, and a new scent masking solution involving crushed rose petals and burned sage. You do not mention the glowing rat, or the mild case of spontaneous condensation that's been plaguing your workbench. The Queen, to her credit, does not scream. She simply nods in that terrifyingly calm way and says, "Fix it." Later that night, you actually attempt to fix it. You install makeshift ventilation, drill a hole through a wooden beam, and begin distilling a fragrant alchemical blend to mask the odors. It smells like burnt cinnamon and faint regret, but it's an improvement. Still, the castle pulses with tension. You can feel it in the stone, in the drafts that carry murmurs you're not meant to hear. Servants dart away when you pass. A dog growled at you this morning. Even the gargoyles seem to be watching more intently. But the Queen hasn't had you exiled. Yet. So you label your glowing rat's new enclosure ambient lighting experiment, light a few candles to distract from the aroma of burnt hair, and carry on. Because your work isn't done, and you are still, barely, welcome in this haunted, hopeful, gold-starved palace. Somewhere around the second hour past midnight, when even the mice in the pantry seem to be whispering, "Go to bed," you decide to follow a rumor. The castle, in its sprawling, twisting, architecturally drunk layout, hides more than dusty storage rooms and suspicious tapestries. Beneath it, through trapdoors and time-worn staircases, lies a network of tunnels so old that no one can agree who built them. Some say medieval monks, others say Roman engineers. A few believe they're natural, carved by the flow of time and secrets. But one rumor, spoken only in hushed tones over too much wine, whispers of a hidden grimoire, tucked away in a subterranean chamber, an ancient alchemical manuscript written by a 9th century monk turned mystic who vanished after allegedly communing with Mercury himself. Historians still debate whether this grimoire ever existed. Some think it was a metaphor for inner knowledge. Others are convinced it was real, its pages cursed, its text written in a cipher that unravels the reader's mind like a poorly cooked sausage. You, being entirely rational and also very desperate, think, "Perfect, I'll bring a candle and some chalk." So you descend. You arm yourself with a lantern, 3 pieces of chalk, 2 for marking the way, 1 for anxiety scribbles, and a sprig of thyme, allegedly protective against curses. You also bring your assistant, whose loyalty remains strong, though his enthusiasm for spooky tunnels is limited. The entrance is tucked behind a forgotten tapestry near the east wing, the one that smells like mildew and melancholia. A tug reveals a narrow stairwell, carved roughly into stone, the air thick with centuries-old dust and secrets best left alone. It gets cold fast. Your footsteps echo as you descend, the lantern casting long, twitching shadows along the walls. Every so often, you hear something skitter. You hum to keep the mood light. Your assistant doesn't laugh, probably because your chosen song is about tax fraud, but still. After what feels like forever, and at least one moment where you definitely walked through a cobweb with teeth, you find it. A door. Wooden. Iron-banded, etched with symbols you almost recognize. The crescent moon, the black sun, the salamander devouring its own tail. Classic, please don't open this energy. So, naturally, you open it. Inside is a small circular chamber. Stone from floor to ceiling, no furniture, just a pedestal in the center, and upon it, a book. It hums. Not in sound, but in feeling, the way your skin tightens, the hairs on your neck rise. The pages seem too old to remain uncrumbled, yet they shimmer faintly. The cover bears no title, only a symbol, a triangle, inside a circle, inside a square. The tria prima. Sulfur, mercury, salt. The core of all things. You reach out. Your assistant coughs. "Should we touch that?" "No," you whisper, and then you touch it. Because you're an alchemist. Because caution is for people with better ventilation. The moment your fingers brush the leather, the room darkens, not visually, but emotionally, like a sigh from the stones. You open the book. Symbols, diagrams, Latin you can barely read, ingredients you've never seen. One passage catches your eye. To awaken the gold that sleeps, first still the soul that burns. Cryptic, ominous, encouraging. You don't understand it, but you copy it down anyway.
Back in your lab, your sanctum of glowing rats, suspicious stains, and barely contained philosophical despair, you place the grimoire notes carefully on your desk, like they might explode, which, frankly, they might. The script you copied still pulses faintly, and one of the diagrams seems to shift when you're not looking directly at it. Probably a trick of the light. Probably. You begin transcribing. The handwriting from the chamber was an uneven scrawl, like someone had written it while half-possessed or distracted by a very aggressive goose. But the structure of the entries, there's a rhythm, a sequence, a recipe, maybe. You underline the parts that mention stillness of flame and the breath of salt. You also circle the line that reads, "Do not listen when the stone begins to speak." You consider underlining it too. Twice. That night, the work takes a new turn. You reconstruct the mixture described in the manuscript, part fermented barley, part white ash, part essence of springtime. That last one stumps you, so you substitute honeysuckle and blind hope. You grind, boil, and distill. The solution thickens into a milky elixir, humming just above audible frequency. Your assistant swears he hears it whisper his name. You tell him it's probably the pipes. He points out, there are no pipes. Historians still debate whether these kinds of texts, black books, as some called them, were ever really magical or simply encoded chemistry lessons dressed up with theology and cryptic flair. Some argue they were guides for inner enlightenment, and that people like you took them far too literally. Others believe certain texts were cursed, or at least written under influential substances. Henbane wine, for example, or mercurial syrup, which did wonders for your focus and horrors for your digestive tract. And then there's the homunculus. That word appears halfway through the passage, scrawled in the margin, almost like an afterthought. Bring forth the knowing servant, born not of flesh, but of will. You pause. Reread.
sigh. Because, of course, it was only a matter of time before the idea showed up. A tiny, artificially created being, part assistant, part secret keeper, part vaguely unsettling mascot. Recipes vary, but one thing is consistent. It requires something living. You eye the glowing rat. It eyes you back. You don't use it. Yet. Instead, you begin sketching the construction. The glass container, the seal of mercury, the infusion of blood. Not yours, ideally. You'll make a mental note to find alternative sources. A goat? A noble's hunting falcon? You'll cross that ethical bridge when you get there. That night, you prepare the chamber. A small furnace. A sealed vessel. A whisper of the forbidden. The air thickens, not just from smoke, but from the weight of maybe. The possibility that this isn't just ritual. That it might actually work. You place the vessel into the fire and wait. Time moves oddly when you're creating life from vapor and ego. The flames flicker higher. A low sound begins to rise, a thrum, steady and soft, like breathing. You lean closer. Then the jar shifts. Just an inch, but enough. You and your assistant freeze. He drops a spoon. You whisper, "Did you see that?" He nods slowly, pale as beeswax. The jar moves again. You step back. Because something inside just twitched.
It twitches again. A soft scrape, like a fingertip on glass. You stare, unblinking. The air around you now sharp with the scent of scorched pine resin and something else. Something metallic and oddly sweet, like old blood on copper. Your assistant starts whispering a prayer, possibly one he's making up on the spot. The vessel pulses. Just once. A heartbeat. Yours skips in response. You want to believe it's the heat, a reaction, a trick of tension between flame and flask. But deep in your gut, you know, this isn't physics. It's not chemistry. This is alchemy, the wild kind, the kind that doesn't ask for permission and almost certainly requires a signed waiver. You remember what the grimoire said, the knowing servant, born not of flesh, but of will. And willpower, at the moment, is the only thing keeping you from flinging the vessel out the window and into the chicken coop. Historians still argue whether homunculi were ever seriously pursued or just metaphorical projections of spiritual transformation. Some texts insist they were real, tiny humanoid creatures born from glass wombs and fire. Others claim they symbolized the alchemist's rebirth, the external manifestation of the purified self. Then there are fringe accounts describing homunculi as advisors to kings, spies in the form of beetles, or screaming bundles of sorrow that must be buried under iron crosses. Your jar doesn't scream. It just wiggles. And then it goes still. For a full minute, nothing happens. You hold your breath. Your assistant grips a poker like he's about to duel a mouse. Then, slowly, condensation forms on the inside of the glass. Tiny droplets, coalescing like tears. From the center of the sludge, something faintly glows. You do not touch it. Not yet. Instead, you begin scribbling notes. Heart rate elevated, flame steady, substance inside now semi-coherent, color bluish gold, texture unknown, odor
burnt almond and regret. You mark the jar with a symbol, triangle within a square, within a circle. You whisper to it not words, but intent. Some alchemists believed the homunculus could sense thoughts, feel commands, even absorb personality traits. You start mentally broadcasting, "Please don't bite." Your assistant suggests we name it. You consider mercy. You settle on caution. By morning, the vessel cools. The glow dims. Whatever was moving no longer stirs. You're not sure if you failed or if it's just sleeping. You wrap the flask in velvet and place it beneath the altar, just in case it wakes up in a mood. And then you're interrupted. A knock, an imperial seal, a messenger, this time a different one, cleaner, faster, breathing like he ran from the royal wing to get here in record time. He hands you the parchment. You unfold it with the delicacy of someone diffusing a particularly petty bomb. The Pope has written. A letter concerning your work has arrived. His Holiness seeks clarification. You blink. Your assistant audibly chokes. You ask, clarification on what? The messenger shrugs. On whether you've created something that cannot be unmade. You glance toward the flask. It twitches. Just once.
Clarification. Such a polite word for, are you meddling with the divine, and if so, can we have a little chat before you summon the Antichrist? You reread the papal letter 3 times that morning. It's less a direct accusation and more a rhetorical trap, phrased with all the slipperiness of an eel dipped in Latin. His Holiness expresses spiritual concern over unnatural ambitions unfolding in the Bohemian court, with particular emphasis on testaments of conjured life and unlicensed mimicry of God's creation. Also, there's a very passive-aggressive blessing at the end, which feels like a velvet hammer. You set the litter down and let out a breath that smells like rosemary and sleep deprivation. The Pope knows. Or at least, he thinks he knows. You suspect someone, probably that velvet-gloved astrology enthusiast, has been writing home with embellished tales. You make a mental note to accidentally misplace his star charts. Your assistant asks the question hanging in the air like mercury vapor. Should we stop? You laugh, a little too hard. Then pour yourself something warm and calming, like wine fortified with wormwood and anxious ambition. You've come too far. The Emperor still wants gold. The Queen still wants silence. And now the Church wants assurances that you're not birthing demons in glass jars. You, meanwhile, would really like a nap. But first, you need to prove the one thing everyone fears you already have. That something you made actually works. And unfortunately, the Treasury has noticed your efforts too. You've received word, indirectly, that funds for your research may be in jeopardy. That, despite the Emperor's obsession, the Empire's coin reserves have dwindled to the point where even the royal falconer had to downgrade to mystery meat. Historians argue whether Rudolf's court ever truly believed gold was coming, or if it was a convenient fantasy, a golden carrot dangled in front of collapsing infrastructure. Some claim the alchemists were used as scapegoats. Others insist they were scapegoats and hope vessels, figures to blame
and adore simultaneously. A fascinatingly awful position to be in, like the one you're in now. You retreat into your lab, block the door, and begin again. Today's experiment, transforming tin into something approximating gold. Not actual gold, mind you, that's still elusive, but close enough to dazzle the Emperor's optics, and, more importantly, the auditors. You use the newly transcribed notes from the Forbidden Grimoire, adjust your ratios, replace mercury with a highly questionable solution distilled from last week's leftover resin mixture. Your crucible sighs when it heats, audibly. You whisper back encouragingly. The glowing rat watches from its jar like a tiny, judgmental professor. Hours pass. You forget to eat. Your assistant brings you soup. You almost pour it into your alloy base. At last, something solidifies. A dull, heavy puck of metal. You polish it with vinegar and thistle oil. It shines. Not gold, not really, but almost. The color's close enough to fake a coin in low light. The weight is satisfying. The Emperor might believe it. The Vatican might not. You stash it beside your growing collection of plausible deceptions. You call it Aurum Candidatus, candidate gold. The day ends with a new note from the Emperor, in a demonstration. Soon. And in the drawer beneath your bench, the flask twitches again.
The castle is quieter than usual. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, more like the someone's about to be exiled kind. Conversations hush when you pass, and you catch the tail ends of phrases like, about if it doesn't work this time, and heard the rat can talk now. That last one's not entirely inaccurate. It hasn't spoken per se, but it does blink in Morse code. Probably. You suspect sabotage. It begins with your iron crucible cracking clean down the middle during a low-heat distillation. Unusual, but perhaps old equipment. Then your supply of red vitriol turns up inert, despite having been freshly acquired from a reputable Venetian merchant. Read guy in a hat who swore by moonlight purity. Finally, your notes, carefully stored and sealed, smell faintly of vinegar and betrayal. You confront your assistant. He swears innocence. His eyebrows do that nervous flutter that suggests he might have left the door unlocked. Twice. So you double-check your inventory. And you find the saltpeter has been swapped for crushed chalk. You don't scream. You simply sit down, very slowly, and make a list. People who could benefit from your failure. People who've expressed a little too much curiosity. People with access to bird feathers and dramatic flair. At the top, the feather alchemist, still parading around with his sparkly poultry like he's cracked the philosopher's egg. You've seen the smug nods he gets from nobles, how he lingers near the emperor's advisors, how his raven, named Lucifer, because of course it is, watches you like it's compiling a report for Satan's private archive. Historians still argue whether rivalries between alchemists were professional, personal, or just deeply petty. Most agree it was all three. Courtly sabotage wasn't unusual. Ingredients went missing. Formulas were swapped. One notable feud ended when a flask was replaced with one full of fermented eel oil and someone lost their eyebrows, and, briefly, their memory of the alphabet. You begin reinforcing your lab. Wards, symbols, a strategically placed puddle of bat urine. You even sprinkled powdered staghorn at the threshold, a known deterrent to mischievous energies, or so one Flemish manuscript insists. Your assistant suggests hiding razor blades in books.
You don't hate the idea. Still, you need allies. You find Johannes again, the jumpy mathematician, with ink on his knuckles and a notebook of dreams he's too scared to read. He's sympathetic. Apparently, someone's been tampering with his star charts too. A Saturn-Jupiter alignment that mysteriously shifted into something resembling an omen. You share a bottle of elderflower wine and watch the stars. He mutters about betrayal among the court, about whispers that someone, maybe even a foreign agent, wants your failure to look like incompetence, not sabotage. You ask him if he believes in your work. He hesitates. I believe the Emperor needs to believe it, whether or not it's true. Back in your lab, the rat curls up beside the imitation gold puck. It seems calm. Your assistant sleeps nearby, twitching softly. You kneel by the sealed drawer. Inside, the homunculus flask no longer twitches. It glows, just faintly, but steady. You don't open it. Not yet. You've already got enough people trying to ruin you from the outside. You don't need something else waking up from within.
It's the kind of morning where the sky looks like lead soup and everyone's pretending nothing's wrong, which, as we all know, is when everything is very wrong. The Emperor's message arrives before sunrise, scrawled in red ink, ominous, dramatic, definitely intentional. It says only this: prepare a public trial. 3 days. No signature, no smiley face, just a royal decree dressed in menace. You reread it while chewing nervously on a stale biscuit. Your assistant reads over your shoulder and immediately drops his mug. Public? You nod grimly. In the court of Rudolf II, public trials were rare, theatrical events, designed less for transparency and more for narrative. A good trial wasn't about truth, it was about spectacle. And this one? It's going to be about you. Word spreads fast. By noon, the courtyard's already being swept, banners dusted, an elaborate platform built, because naturally, the moment you might humiliate yourself, there needs to be elevation and good lighting. I swear the Alchemist Velvet is already rehearsing a monologue. You spend that evening planning. There are two options. Either demonstrate actual transmutation or simulate it convincingly enough to pass as the real thing. Historically, alchemists have done both. Some used sleight of hand, like the classic golden nail hidden in the crucible trick. Others performed legitimate alloy manipulation, using arsenic and antimony to alter surface appearance, making lead or tin look like silver or gold under the right conditions. Historians remain divided on whether these performances were conscious frauds or part of a ritual drama, the alchemist as performer, priest, and proto-chemist. In your case, you're leaning toward a bit of stagecraft with flair. You begin preparations with the solemnity of someone preparing a magic show for a potentially violent audience. First, the crucible. You polish a fresh one, test it, hide nothing until the morning of. Second, your formula. You use aurum candidatus, your faux gold alloy, this time refined with a few drops of ammonia, some beetle shell dust, and the secret ingredient, confidence. Third, the distraction. You've taught the glowing rat to sit perfectly still on command. You'll perch it nearby. If all else fails, people love a glowing animal, especially one that doesn't bite. Then you practice. You time each step like a dance. Heat, pour, stir, flash of color, metallic puck, polish, reveal. By the end of the second night, you've got it down to a science, or at least a science-adjacent performance. Your assistant claps, you bow dramatically, the rat sneezes faintly and glows in approval. But you can't stop thinking about the sealed flask. It still glows. Not brightly, not threateningly, just enough to remind you that something is inside. Something waiting, watching, becoming. You consider unveiling it during the trial. An ace up your sleeve. A miracle, or a mistake. You shake your head. Too risky. Too soon.
Instead, you place it beneath the platform, sealed in a box etched with wards and irony. The night before the trial, the sky weeps a soft rain and the castle seems to sigh. You barely sleep. Instead, you run your lines, you polish your tools, you stare into the fire and imagine gold. You also bribe a guard to make sure your platform doesn't collapse. Just in case.
Morning breaks like overcooked glass, loud, jagged, and way too early. You pull on your finest robes, well, the cleanest ones, which is saying something given that most of your wardrobe smells faintly of sulfur and crushed beetles. Still, you add a sash for drama. You even trim your beard. Presentation matters when your career and potentially your head is on the line. The platform's already crowded by the time you arrive. Nobles jostle for better viewing spots. Court scribes sharpen their quills like they're prepping for battle. Someone's selling candied almonds. You hate how festive it feels. At the center sits Emperor Rudolf, perched beneath a crimson canopy, flanked by advisors who wear expressions that range from amused to predatory. His eyes lock on you the moment you ascend the platform. He doesn't blink. You swallow hard and pretend you don't feel like a pigeon about to audition for a souk pot. The Velvet Alchemist is there, of course. He's brought his raven, Lucifer, who flaps dramatically and lands on the armrest beside the Emperor. Subtle. You take your place before the crucible. "Demonstrate," he intones, his voice as flat as a tomb lid. No pressure. You begin. With the calm of someone who might be hyperventilating internally, you heat the crucible, carefully, gradually, just enough to make the powdered blend bubble without triggering another sealing incident. The crowd leans in. You pour in your alloy, stir. Wait. Then comes the moment. You add the final dusting of beetle shell, just enough to refract the light as the mixture cools. With a whisper you don't remember planning, you draw back the lid and extract the puck. It gleams under the pale sun like, well, not perfect gold, but convincing gold. Court gold, the kind that makes people lean back and go, The Emperor rises, takes the puck, weighs it in his hand. Silence. Then he nods. A small one, barely perceptible, but definitely a nod. The crowd exhales. A few even clap. One noble murmurs, "Marvelous," with the energy of a man who just saw a competent puppet show. You resist the urge to collapse. Historians still debate whether such trials were ever truly passed, or if success was defined entirely whether the ruler wanted to believe. Some posit that alchemists were judged not on results, but on performance, whether they could maintain the illusion of progress, of mystical control, of something just around the corner. Others argue it was more transactional, make gold or make your will. You just made a puck of glittering bronze and survived. Barely. You bow, step down, heart still hammering like a church bell on fire. Your assistant rushes to meet you, his grin wide enough to alarm wildlife. "You did it," he whispers. "We're alive." For now. Because as you return to the lab, exhausted, exhilarated, and slightly dizzy, you notice something odd. The rat won't come out of its enclosure. It just stares at the drawer where the flask is hidden. It won't even eat the almond your assistant offers. And rats love almonds. It's science. You approach the drawer. The flask inside, still glowing. But now, it pulses. Rhythmically, like a heartbeat. You whisper, "No, no, no," because you know that pulse. That's not gold. That's life. You do what any self-respecting alchemist would do when confronted with a pulsating flask that may or may not contain a homemade soul. You panic, quietly, elegantly. Mostly by pacing in tight circles while muttering Latin phrases you only half remember from that one monk who smelled like wet parchment and despair. Your assistant suggests you maybe open it and poke whatever's inside with a stick.
You consider firing him, or promoting him. Hard to tell these days. The flask, sealed weeks ago, now thrums with unmistakable rhythm. It's subtle, but persistent, like a heartbeat or a ticking clock counting down to something. You stare at it, willing it to be less alive. It doesn't listen. Instead, it glows brighter. Historians still wrestle with the notion of alchemically created life. Some dismissed the homunculus as allegory, a metaphor for the alchemist's internal transformation. Others wrote detailed recipes involving human hair, rainwater, and long exposure to heat, believing tiny beings could emerge from pure intention and fermented clay. There's one particularly disturbing account of a monk who claimed his homunculus demanded soup constantly. You decide not to feed yours. Instead, you do what scholars would call a containment assessment, and what your assistant calls wiggling the jar with tongs. You lower the flask into a lead-lined box etched with protective symbols from every culture you can remember. You even throw in a clove of garlic and a chunk of consecrated soap. Belt meets suspenders. The rat watches, doesn't blink. And then, as if things couldn't escalate more oddly, he arrives. A stranger from Venice. Tall, silver-haired, with gloves so clean they almost offend you. He's introduced as Signore Barozzi, alchemist, philosopher, and alleged descendant of Hermes Trismegistus himself. You suspect this last detail was added for flair. He walks into your lab like he owns the floor, nods at your assistant, glances at the rat, and then stops. Right in front of the lead-lined box. He doesn't touch it. Doesn't need to. "It's awake," he says softly, almost fondly. You freeze. You know what it is?" He smiles the smile of someone who definitely has a hidden agenda. "Not exactly, but I've heard the signs. Glow, pulse, resistance to categorization." He glances at your shelves. "Tell me, did you name it?" You don't answer. He gives a polite bow and asks to stay for a few days, to observe. The emperor, he says, invited him to consult on matters of philosophical materialism. Translation: he's here to peer into your mysteries and maybe take credit for your breakthroughs. You reluctantly agree, mostly because you have no authority to say no, and partially because you're not sure what's inside the box wants you to say no. That night, you sleep poorly. You dream of mirrors, of faces inside flasks, of voices humming in harmonic intervals. You wake with a start, heart thudding. The rat is sitting on your chest. It blinks once, turns, and points its nose toward the box. You open your mouth to ask why, and from inside the lead-lined container, something taps. Twice.
Tap, tap. The sound echoes through the lab like a whispered dare. You stare at the lead-lined box, every hair on your arm slowly rising as though pulled by invisible strings. The rat scampers back to its corner. Your assistant mumbles something about holy water and a very long vacation. You can't disagree. Barozzi, the visiting Venetian, is already at the work table, sipping wine and jotting observations in a tiny black notebook. "How fascinating," he murmurs without looking up. "It's communicating." You resist the urge to throw something at him, preferably something on fire. Instead, you step cautiously toward the box, not to open it. Oh no, you're not that unhinged. Just close enough to feel the air around it, which now seems warmer, thicker, like the atmosphere of a room holding its breath.
You ask, mostly to yourself, "What are you?" It doesn't answer, of course. That would be too easy. Instead, the tapping stops, and the glow intensifies. Historians have long speculated that alchemists occasionally crossed into what we might call the supernatural. They didn't see hard boundaries between science and mysticism, between chemical reactions and cosmic will. Some claimed their greatest creations were guided by invisible intelligences, by spirits inhabiting matter, or even by echoes of divine thought. Others just claimed they saw colors that hadn't been invented yet, and left the rest vague. Barozzi begins to theorize aloud. Perhaps you've reached the threshold of the anima mundi, the soul of the world. The flask may contain not merely a substance, but a question. You mutter. Yes, and that question is, why did you poke it? Still, the scholar's presence has stirred something else. The emperor's attention. Rudolf sends for you the next morning. You're escorted to his private solar, a warm chamber crammed with star charts, wax skulls, and a canary that appears to be wearing a tiny velvet cap. The emperor looks worse than usual, pale, distracted, fingering an obsidian pendant like it's the only thing tethering him to reality. He asks, "Are you still working toward the gold?" You nod. Progress continues. He leans forward, eyes gleaming. And the other thing, the life form, the flask. Ah. So he knows. Barozzi, it turns out, has wasted no time making himself useful, or at least present. He's been whispering about potential miracles, living vessels, communication with other planes. And Rudolf, oh, he's listening. He wants this. Wants more than gold now. He wants prophecy, immortality, maybe even absolution. Historians still argue whether Rudolf's descent into obsession was madness or vision. Some believe he genuinely thought alchemy would reveal divine truth. Others say he simply cracked under the weight of empire and expectation. You're inclined to think it's both, because you see it in his eyes. He doesn't just want results. He wants meaning. And now you've accidentally handed him a glowing, tapping maybe creature in a jar. You leave the meeting dizzy with dread. Back in the lab, the rat is perched on the open windowsill, gazing out toward the city like it's planning an escape. Barozzi is polishing his notebook. The box remains sealed. But now, as you sit beside it, scribbling more frantic observations than ever, you hear breathing. Not yours, not your assistant's, not Barozzi's. From inside the box. Shallow, rhythmic, as if something is dreaming and maybe waking up.
You try to ignore it. The breathing. Soft, steady, like a lullaby sung in reverse. You tell yourself it's just the flask adjusting to ambient temperature, a trick of acoustics. Maybe the lab walls are finally whispering back, which honestly would not even break the top 5 weird things this week. But then the dreams begin. You wake each night with memories that don't feel like yours. Towers made of bone. Spirals that lead inward, not upward. A voice, not loud, not even clear, murmuring from behind a membrane of glass and fire. Words you don't understand, but which settle behind your eyes like dust that won't wash away. Barozzi, naturally, is thrilled.
"You're connected now," he says one morning over stale bread and a tincture he swears enhances inner vision. You ask if it's safe. He shrugs. Mostly. Your assistant, on the other hand, has started leaving the lab at sunset and won't return until full daylight. It's the shadows, he says. They're behaving independently. You don't blame him, because sometimes you catch one that moves out of rhythm with your body. The Emperor, ever the enthusiast for esoteric chaos, has increased his inquiries. He now sends questions hourly via royal courier. Has it spoken? Does it feel pain? Can it be replicated? You're tempted to respond with, yes, also it wants a promotion. Historians still puzzle over the role alchemists played as both innovators and confessors, scientists who were expected not just to explain the world, but to redeem it. Gold was the surface goal, but underneath, the hunger to summon meaning from dust, to turn despair into something eternal, beautiful. And now you've summoned this. You finally decide to open the box, not because it's wise or safe, but because not opening it feels more dangerous, like the waiting itself might unmake you. So you clear the lab, burn sage, place a circle of chalk and iron filings around your workspace. You don your thickest gloves, say a prayer to whatever alchemical guardian still tolerates your antics, and lift the lead-lined lid. The flask inside is warm. Not hot, warm. The glow pulses, slow and deliberate. Inside, the substance has shifted. No longer fluid, it's taken shape. Something like a curled embryo. Not human, not animal, just present. It doesn't move, but it knows you're here. You speak, just once, quietly. What are you? The flask fogs over, as if it sighed. Barotsi watches from the corner, reverent. He mutters, "This is not transmutation. This is conception." You hate how poetic that sounds. You reseal the box, re-etch the sigils. You don't sleep that night, but the dreams still come. This time, sharper. You see Prague from above, its rooftops spinning like cogs. You see fire in reverse. You see yourself opening a second jar. There is no second jar. Yet. The next morning, the Emperor summons you again. And this time, he doesn't ask about gold. He asks about souls.
There's no good way to answer the Emperor when he asks if you've created a soul. Not because you haven't considered it, but because there's simply no box to tick under. Maybe accidentally birthed a glowing consciousness from bat ash and antique philosophy. You stand there, blinking, as Rudolf leans forward on his obsidian throne like a man who's misplaced the boundary between belief and obsession. You try to sidestep. The flask is evolving. Does it dream? He asks. You hesitate. Then, because lying to the Holy Roman Emperor rarely ends in bonus pastries, you say, yes. He smiles. It's not comforting. He dismisses the court, even Barotsi, who looks momentarily offended before slipping out with the dignified bitterness of a man denied drama. You're left alone with the Emperor and a map of the heavens etched in silver. He confides something then, his voice quieter than you've ever heard it. When I was a boy, I dreamed of a city made of mirrors, where time didn't move forward, only around. I thought I would find it in science, then in gold, then in power. He looks up, eyes glassy. Now I wonder if it lies in reflection, if your creature is not new, but remembered. Historians still debate Rudolf's late obsession with identity, rebirth, and mirror worlds. Some say he sought to build an empire of perfect knowledge where reality could be mapped, cataloged, controlled. Others believe he simply feared death, that his support for alchemists was less about science and more about bargaining for a second chance. Either way, you leave that room with a new problem. The Emperor wants more than gold, more than proof. He wants communion. Back in your lab, the box is warm again. The flask vibrates faintly, like a note held too long. Your assistant, who now sleeps with garlic under his pillow and keeps a dagger dipped in sage oil, says the rat has started drawing shapes in its bedding. You don't ask how. Instead, you focus on the next step, what the grimoire called the book that should not exist. You dig through the castle's neglected library, brittle scrolls, forbidden texts, notes from alchemists who either vanished or went full feral. And there you find it. A slim volume, bound in cracked gray leather, the title burned off. No record of it exists. No author. No index. The first page reads, "To call it forth is not to own it, but to serve it." Promising. You translate what you can. The pages describe a ritual, less about summoning and more about revealing, like you've already made the creature and now just need to peel away the veil between it and you. One part of the text strikes you hard. When the vessel ceases to breathe, it begins to speak. You return to the flask. It's still. No more pulse. No more fogging glass. Just the faint golden shimmer of stillness. You place your hand on the glass, and you hear not words, not thoughts, but emotion. Grief, wonder, hunger. You stagger back. The flask remains quiet. But something shifted. You whisper to your assistant, "We're past science now." He nods. "Yeah. We're somewhere between theology and, oh no." And you haven't even performed the ritual yet.
You try to ignore it. The breathing. Soft, steady, like a lullaby sung in reverse. You tell yourself it's just the flask adjusting to ambient temperature, a trick of acoustics. Maybe the lab walls are finally whispering back, which honestly would not even break the top 5 weird things this week. But then the dreams begin. You wake each night with memories that don't feel like yours. Towers made of bone. Spirals that lead inward, not upward. A voice, not loud, not even clear, murmuring from behind a membrane of glass and fire. Words you don't understand, but which settle behind your eyes like dust that won't wash away. Baruzzi, naturally, is thrilled. "You're connected now," he says one morning over stale bread and a tincture he swears enhances inner vision. You ask if it's safe. He shrugs. Mostly. Your assistant, on the other hand, has started leaving the lab at sunset and won't return until full daylight. "It's the shadows," he says. "They're behaving independently." You don't blame him, because sometimes you catch one that moves out of rhythm with your body. The Emperor, ever the enthusiast for esoteric chaos, has increased his inquiries. He now sends questions hourly via royal courier. Has it spoken? Does it feel pain? Can it be replicated? You're tempted to respond with, "Yes, also it wants a promotion." Historians still puzzle over the role alchemists played as both innovators and confessors, scientists who were expected not just to explain the world, but to redeem it. Gold was the surface goal, but underneath, the hunger to summon meaning from dust, to turn despair into something eternal, beautiful. And now you've summoned this. You finally decide to open the box, not because it's wise or safe, but because not opening it feels more dangerous, like the waiting itself might unmake you. So you clear the lab, burn sage, place a circle of chalk and iron filings around your workspace. You don your thickest gloves, say a prayer to whatever alchemical guardian still tolerates your antics, and lift the lead-lined lid. The flask inside is warm. Not hot, warm. The glow pulses, slow and deliberate. Inside, the substance has shifted. No longer fluid, it's taken shape. Something like a curled embryo. Not human, not animal, just present. It doesn't move, but it knows you're here. You speak, just once, quietly. "What are you?" The flask fogs over, as if it sighed. Barotsi watches from the corner, reverent. He mutters, "This is not transmutation. This is conception." You hate how poetic that sounds. You reseal the box, re-etch the sigils. You don't sleep that night, but the dreams still come. This time, sharper. You see Prague from above, its rooftops spinning like cogs. You see fire in reverse. You see yourself opening a second jar. There is no second jar. Yet. The next morning, the Emperor summons you again. And this time, he doesn't ask about gold. He asks about souls.
You stand there, arm outstretched, forming a very human and very flammable barrier between a Holy Roman Emperor and a glowing entity that may or may not be your glass-born brainchild. The silence is thick. Rudolf blinks, just once, and lowers his hand with the reluctant grace of a child told they can't pet the lion. "It recoiled," he murmurs, not to you, but to the shimmering presence still hovering gently above the ritual circle. Why? You don't answer. You don't know if you should. Because the light, no longer confined to the flask, is changing. It pulses now in a way that seems to correspond with your heartbeat. Its form isn't solid, but it hints at one. Edges, shadows, the brief illusion of shape. Not humanoid exactly, more like a figure you'd see in a dream and forget upon waking. Familiar,
unsettling, possible. Barozzi steps closer, ever the philosopher moth drawn to the alchemical flame. "It is choosing its moment," he says softly. "This is the trial, not of fire or formula, but of intent." Your assistant whispers, "It's not just a reaction anymore, is it?" You shake your head. "No, it's responding." And then the Emperor does something truly terrifying. He kneels. Right there, on the dusty floor of a forgotten chamber, among iron filings and moonseed crumbs, the most powerful man in the Empire bends one knee and lowers his gaze. "I welcome you," he says, voice rough with reverence. "Whatever you are, I recognize your wisdom. I ask, what do you require of us?" There's a long pause, the kind that presses into your chest like the weight of centuries. And then, from the light, comes a sound. Not speech, not song, but tone, a chord, soft and low like the gentle hum of a bowed glass rim. It fills the space not just with sound, but with meaning. Regret, wonder, resistance. You understand somehow. It doesn't want anything, not yet, but it remembers wanting. Not yours, not Rudolf's. Something older. Something borrowed, maybe. A longing caught in amber and mercury. Historians still argue about moments like this, alchemical turning points when the mystical intersected with the political. Some believe stories of living stones and speaking flames were metaphorical propaganda, tools of influence dressed in divine mystery. Others wonder if these tales were true, but poorly understood, perhaps even censored. What happens next is something you never planned for. The light flickers. Then it moves. Not toward you, not toward Rudolf, but to the rat. The glowing rat, loyal and ever watchful, scurries forward. It pauses before the entity, nose twitching, eyes unblinking, and the light, gentle as breath, descends. For one impossible moment they merge, not violently, not permanently, just touch. The rat glows brighter, not just phosphorescence, but presence. It turns, looks at you, and bows. Not deep, not dramatic, just enough to be unmistakable. Then it curls into its nest and sleeps. The light returns to its center, dimming, retreating, but pulsing now with less urgency, like it's resting, waiting. Rudolf exhales a shaky breath. "It is a sign," you nod, numb. "Of what?" "That Bohemia is blessed." You don't say it out loud, but you think it. Or very, very doomed, because whatever you've created is not finished, and now the Emperor wants to share it with the world. That night, you don't return to the lab. Instead, you find yourself walking the mist-wrapped streets of Prague like a man both celebrated and hunted, one whose footsteps now echo with consequences. You wrap your cloak tight, not against the cold, but against the weight of what's just happened. Somewhere in a forgotten chamber beneath the castle, your creation, or revelation, is sleeping, or pretending to. The Emperor has declared it a divine omen, a symbol of Bohemia's favor in the eyes of whatever cosmic accountants keep track of such things. He wants a procession, a formal announcement. "Let the people see the light," he said, eyes bright, voice trembling with purpose. "Let them witness." You remember nodding, smiling. leaving the room like a man who just agreed to walk blindfolded through a field of fireworks. Barozzi has been instructed to prepare a discourse, which is code for claim credit in as many languages as possible. You're not even mad. That's just the job. Historians will eventually disagree on what exactly happened next. Some records say your creation vanished. Others say it was moved to a royal vault. A few claim it was paraded through the streets in a glass carriage surrounded by musicians and priests. One particularly dramatic account mentions it hovering over the Vltava River, singing. You know the truth. Sort of. Because when you return to the lab just before dawn, something is missing. Not the box, not the flask, the rat. Its nest is cold, its bedding undisturbed, its little bowl of crushed nuts untouched. You search the corners, the ducts, even the drawer where you once stored ingredients too judgmental to use. Nothing. Your assistant finds a single trail of glowing dust, barely visible, leading toward the open window. Just outside, a perfect footprint. Not a rat's, a human one. Small, narrow, bare, and glowing faintly. You don't speak for a long time, because what's left in the box isn't your creation. It's a husk. The light has moved on. Somehow, maybe by will, maybe through the rat, maybe with help. You don't know, but it's gone, and it left no note. Barozzi finds you later, sipping cold tea and staring at the footprint like it might finish the sentence you've been stuck in. He doesn't ask what happened. He just says, "It's begun, hasn't it?" You nod. Whatever it is. The Emperor? He's furious when he finds out. Orders a search, blames spies, traitors, the Jesuits. You keep your head down. Play the devoted scientist. Let them believe what they need to believe. But deep down, you know. You didn't create a tool, or a toy, or even a miracle. You set something loose, and now it walks. Somewhere, out in the fog-soaked alleys of Prague, or beneath the moonlight among the trees, your half-alive, half-imagined, not quite homunculus is learning what it means to exist, and possibly what it means to want. You wonder if it remembers you. You hope it doesn't hate you. And you pray, quietly, that it doesn't come back with questions.
The disappearance changes everything. For one, no one believes you. Not entirely. Oh, they see the footprint, the faint trail of glowing dust, the missing rat, but they don't feel it like you do. They didn't hear the flask sigh. They didn't see light and memory swirl together and choose a body, a path, a direction. The Emperor, unsurprisingly, demands results. Recreate it, he says, pacing like a storm in velvet. The ritual, the vessel, do it again. You nod slowly, as if he's just asked for more soup. Of course, Your Majesty, right away. You lie. Because deep down, you know. It doesn't work like that. This wasn't a process. It was a convergence. Right time, right mixture, right something. Trying to repeat it would be like trying to fall in love twice with the same dream. Still, you put on a show. You pretend to work. You stir things. You mutter into cauldrons. You burn herbs that smell like charred lemons and unfinished decisions.
The Emperor watches from the shadows, hope corroding into frustration. Your assistant, bless him, keeps up the ruse. He writes fake notes in his best spidery script, occasionally throws in nonsense phrases like mercurial shoal shift achieved via larch resin. No one questions it. But beneath the pageantry, Prague is stirring. The story spreads, of course, the glowing thing that vanished. Some say it flew away. Others claim it melted into the walls and now haunts the castle with cryptic lullabies. One baker insists it visits him at night and critiques his crust. Historians will never agree on the truth. Some say it was myth, political theater crafted to distract from economic collapse and foreign threats. Others argue it was real, a rogue alchemical consciousness that slipped through the cracks of the known world. A few suggest it was a metaphor for Rudolf himself, radiant, strange, and slipping beyond comprehension. You know better. It wasn't about gold. It was never about gold. That was just the bait. This, whatever this was about becoming. In the weeks that follow, strange sightings are reported. A child glimpses a figure moving through the fog, barefoot, glowing. A librarian finds a book rewritten in a language no one knows, except it rhymes. A monk claims a rat stared at him so profoundly that he now doubts his own existence. You receive a package. No return address. Inside, a single stone, warm to the touch, inscribed with the alchemical symbol for completion. And a feather. One of yours, from the lab. You don't tell the Emperor. You don't tell anyone. You place the stone on your shelf between the failed transmutation puck and the dried lizard you still claim was once a salamander of fate. And you wait. Some nights, when the wind slides between the rooftops just right, you hear footsteps that aren't yours. Quiet, careful, unhurried. You tell yourself it's nothing, but you check the drawer anyway. Still empty and glowing.
You begin to notice the absences more than the presences. Not just the rat, though yes, you still find yourself glancing at its empty nest with a pang of guilt and awe, but other things, subtle, disjointed, missing. One of your journals vanishes, then a set of old coins from your definitely fake gold drawer, then your assistant's boots. He swears he left them by the fire, and you believe him. The next morning, they're back, lined up perfectly, scrubbed clean. You find one filled with crushed time. Meanwhile, Rudolf is slipping. He doesn't sleep anymore, not properly. His letters are increasingly erratic, sketches scrawled in margins, repeated words. Light, light, light. His obsession has deepened, twisted into a spiral of paranoia. He's convinced the entity left to commune with something larger, something beneath Prague, beneath reality itself. He's begun spending nights in the hidden library, reading books that smell of mildew and bad decisions. You once caught him trying to translate his dreams in charcoal on the wall. You want to help him. But the truth is, you're unraveling too. Not in the way of madness, not yet. But you've started drawing things you don't remember dreaming. Shapes with too many corners. Eyes that seem to float. Maps of cities that have never existed and yet feel familiar. You walk differently now, listening for footsteps behind you. Sometimes you turn sharply, expecting something, but there's never anything there. Just wind. Just a creak of an old floorboard. Just the echo of your own making. Barozzi has gone. Quietly, without a farewell. He left behind a note. There are other courts, other listeners. Cryptic, rude, predictable. You imagine he's halfway to Florence by now, spinning tales in exchange for wine and warm places to sleep. You don't envy him. Much. Historians still comb through this period like archaeologists at a sandstorm wedding. Pieces everywhere, timelines cracked. Did Rudolf commission a second homunculus? Did the creature return? Did you go mad? One account claims you vanished during a lunar eclipse, leaving behind only a glowing footprint and a jar of rose water that reversed aging for approximately 6 minutes. Another says you moved to a monastery in Bavaria where you wrote a 900-page treatise on ethical transmutation, then exploded trying to replicate yourself with nutmeg and honesty. The truth? You stay. In the castle, in your lab, with its sigil-scarred walls and its faint, persistent glow. You keep working, though you're no longer sure what you're aiming for. There are no formulas left to follow, no stone to chase, no emperor who understands what you've become. You're no longer an alchemist in the traditional sense. You're a listener now. You wait for the breath behind the silence, for the feeling of thought in a room you haven't entered, for the return not of the thing in the flask, but of the choice it made and what it might ask of you next. Some nights you find a feather on your windowsill, damp with dew, tinged with light. You never see it arrive, but it's always the same color. The exact color of that first moment when lead shimmered and something impossible looked back at you.
You hardly notice the seasons anymore. Time, in its usual orderly rhythm, has become strange. Less a series of passing days, more a coil that loops and tugs at itself. The clocks still tick, but sometimes the tick comes before the talk, and you'll look up from a half-finished formula to realize the moon has been staring through your window for hours, though it's barely noon. The lab is quieter now. No visitors, no messengers. No more velvet-gloved rivals with names like Barozzi or Malvino or Cardinal this or that, asking questions they only half understand. Even Rudolf has grown silent. His obsession burned bright, then turned inward like a dying star folding into itself. He no longer summons you, no longer writes. Occasionally, you hear him pacing the long halls at night, whispering to the stained glass. But your work hasn't stopped, because the light, your light, left something behind. It's subtle, but real. A residue of understanding, a soft tension in the air, like string drawn between 2 points that haven't met yet. You work within that tension. You think within it, not to recreate the moment, but to remember it. The rat never returned. Neither did the flask, or the exact glow, or the tapping. But the feeling, that ache of potential, is still with you. It's not about gold. Never was. Not really. It was about seeing what could be pulled from the impossible and what it meant when it looked back. Historians, as always, will try to explain it. Some say you created the first artificial soul. Others claim you were deceived by a clever illusion, a con man's trick using rare phosphors and hope. A few write you off as a symbol, the failed dreamer of Prague, the fool who reached too far too fast. But you know better, because sometimes, in the dead of night, something responds. Not with light, not with sound, but with presence. You'll be scribbling on parchment, reworking a formula, when suddenly the air thickens, just slightly, as if the walls are leaning closer, not threatening, just curious. You glance to the shelf, the stone they sent you still warm, the feather untouched, the window open. And then finally, one evening, you find the message, etched faintly into the stone windowsill, so faint you nearly miss it. 5 words. Still listening, not yet done. You laugh, or maybe cry, or maybe both, and it echoes down the corridor like a half-forgotten spell. You don't know what's coming, only that it chose to begin with you, and that somehow you still matter.
And now, as the candle burns low and the fog rolls once more over the quiet streets of Prague, you rest your head beside your notes. The symbols blur, the ink fades into shadow. The air is cool and steady, the walls humming softly with old magic and older silence. Outside, the moon drifts behind a veil of cloud, pale and perfect. A gentle breeze slips through the cracks in the old window frame, tugging at the corners of forgotten pages. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolls, a soft reminder that time, even warped and folded, still moves forward. You are safe, for now. The flask is gone, but you are still here, breathing, dreaming, perhaps not creating gold, but holding on to something stranger, something deeper, hope wrapped in mystery. You were never just chasing the stone, you were becoming one. Something shaped by fire and faith and all the beautiful, dangerous questions no one dares ask. Let that glow settle in your chest. Let it soften your breath. You are part of the great work now. Let the whispers fade. Let the page close. Let the light, that quiet, pulsing, impossible light, guide you. Not outward, but inward. And if you listen closely, even now, you might still hear it, breathing, waiting, becoming.